What I want to talk about is what the expansion of domestic violence courts have meant both for victims but also for practitioners. Specialization began in the early 1990s in North America, and the court that I have been studying for the last now 21 years began in 1990. It was the first court of its kind in Canada. In Dade County in Florida, they introduced specialized courts in 1989, and it was originally a treatment court for drugs, but found that it also worked extremely well if they specialized in the domestic violence field. So they began to spread in the 1990s in the United States. In Canada today, we have 6 provinces and 1 territory with specialized courts, a total of 65 domestic violence courts in the country, and in the United States, over 400 domestic violence courts. So it's very much become a model that is accepted in North America. Now, there are 2 important factors, I think, about this model. One of them we expect, and that is that there should be an expansion of services and a new attitude towards victims in these courts. But the other aspect we didn't expect, I'm not even sure we planned for it, but it occurred, and that is we started to create better working environments for prosecutors and for judges. Because think about it. As long as prosecutors were using the old standard of conviction as a measure of success, nobody wanted to do domestics. They're difficult. They're hard. Victims are ambivalent. They'll change their mind. And so what happened is we had this perverse system in the mainstream where the hardest cases that required the greatest insight and legal knowledge were being handled by the most junior prosecutors. And so one of the things that the designers of the court in Winnipeg said to the Minister of Justice is, if you want this to work, you have to make this a good career choice for prosecutors. You have to make this a ladder to the top and not a trap at the bottom. And I'm pleased to say that right now in our jurisdiction, we now have 5 judges who are former prosecutors in the family violence unit. And so it literally has become a good career choice. It's attracting the best and brightest minds. People compete to get into this unit, which in the past they would have run away in fear. And so you're by creating a better work environment and different work incentives for prosecutors working in this unit, you're getting the kind of commitment and the kind of specialization that is really needed to understand the very complex dynamics of domestic violence. Well, how do you improve the judges' working conditions? Everybody thinks they have pretty good working conditions. But think about it if you're a judge. In the general courts, you would have a break and enter, you might have an armed robbery, you'd have a domestic, you'd have a shoplifting. You could have this huge mess of cases all lined up on your list and very little opportunity to give them the kind of consideration and to realize the dynamics in each of those crimes are radically different, and your interventions and your thought about it have to be radically different. So by having judges, and in our jurisdiction, first they just specialized. There were 14 judges, and that's all they did. However, the volume of cases was grew so radically that now all of the judges in our provincial court will have a week in domestic violence court, or a week in our specialized bail court, or a week in the trial court. And they'll know that for that week, they concentrate only on domestic violence cases. We've also improved the judges' working conditions by having incredibly effective prosecutors. Tough, well understood, well researched briefs that raise the bar for everyone in the courtroom. The defense lawyer has to be better because the prosecutor's case is stronger. The judge has more information to deal with and to weigh because the prosecutor has their time and their expertise to prepare a very strong brief. Okay, so how do the components of court impact on the victim? Well, in every jurisdiction in Canada that has introduced court specialization, there has been a massive expansion of victim services programs because the courts fully understand that they can't respond to all of the needs of the victim, and the prosecutors don't often have the time to spend with the victim. And so in order to make the court effective and to make them responsive, the expansion of victim services has been a fundamental component, and it has occurred in every jurisdiction where we've introduced specialization. The other thing that I think benefits victims is we have trained and experienced specialist prosecutors. In the city that I come from, Winnipeg, we have a population of about 700,000. We have a specialist unit of prosecutors of 18. And all they do all the time is domestic. Some specialize in child abuse, some specialize in domestic, spousal partner abuse. But they're specialists, and what they do is they become the resource for the rest of the prosecutors in the province. If they have a difficult case, they can phone the unit, get the latest case law, the best advice, and so while there's only 18 in one city, their expertise can be drawn on throughout the province, and also to give them a break. Sometimes these specialist prosecutors also do circuit court outside of the city in the smaller communities, so that the smaller communities benefit from having a specialist prosecutor, because in these smaller communities, typically 60 to 70% of the cases before the judge are domestic. So that has been very beneficial, I think, for victims because they're getting the best prosecutor. The other thing that occurs in many jurisdictions, and definitely in Winnipeg, is the prosecutors have file ownership. So if Prosecutor Brown has case Smith, if Mr. Smith reoffends next year or the year after, or if the case is appealed, the prosecutor stays with that same case, so that the victim doesn't have to deal with 3 or 4 prosecutors as the case goes through the court. And sometimes, if it's a complicated case, it may go from bail, of course, the bail hearing, same prosecutor, a trial, same prosecutor, an appeal, same prosecutor. So you have consistency across the board, and that benefits the victim. It also benefits the prosecutor, because we talked yesterday about how in one of the sessions I attended, how the criminal justice system really operates on a single incident view. And we all know that domestic violence is seldom, if ever, a single incident. And what happens for prosecutors is, as they get to know the family and the dynamic, they know the whole history. So when they go to court, they can speak with that knowledge, and they can put that single incident in a meaningful historical context and allow the judge to make a much more informed decision. The other thing that has occurred across Canada is expansion of treatment programs for offenders. And just to give you an example, in Winnipeg, prior to the introduction of the specialized court, the City of Winnipeg probation officer had 80 family violence offenders on their case files. The year after, they had 800. And the year after that, they had 1,500. So one of the things that happened when they introduced the specialized court was there was absolutely a revolution in sentencing. We went from having the most frequent disposition being conditional discharge and probation, and or or probation, to the most frequent disposition being 2 years probation and court-mandated treatment, and the second most frequent disposition, if in cases of reoffense, was incarceration. So the message from the bench changed radically. This, of course, pushed the correctional system to respond massively to provide the treatment programs that were now being ordered by the court. And the other thing that I think is very important in Canada, there was some concern among some women's organizations that if we put resources into the criminal justice system, we would be robbing resources from the social service system. So I looked at the expansion of programming in the social service system at the same time to see if it was robbing Peter to pay Paul. And in fact, it did not work that way. You found that there was also simultaneously an expansion of the social services, shelters, second stage housing, counseling programs. So for these factors, I think we see a benefit